Do you still consider Article 5 an unconditional commitment?
Yeah, so let me address that holistically if it's okay, because I think we have time to do it. First of all, you're right. I have throughout my entire career in the Senate and through much of my time now in this administration been a supporter of NATO.
In January, Congress pre-approved a $14 billion arms package for Taiwan. It's been 6 months. We haven't received a notification. Have you advised President Trump to proceed with this?
Yeah, it's under, but I don't know if you were here a moment ago when I discussed, we just did $11 billion in December, which was, I think, the largest sale in history. Certainly, I think it was more than the cumulative amount under the Biden administration. And I recall during 6 years of the Obama administration, there was zero. It's under review under the White House.
Mr. Secretary, my concern is that President Trump has said publicly that arms sales to Taipei are a great negotiating chip with China.
Rights. And now we are living in a world in which some of these countries, I point to Spain as an example, openly brag about how they've denied us the use of these bases. And so if the core rationale for us being in NATO, if what we get out of NATO is the...
Is it not true that some of the challenges in our NATO relations have only come after President Trump threatened to seize territory from a trusted and reliable and contributing partner?
Yeah, I don't think that's fair.
I think he publicly said both.
I know.
Chris Coons confronted Marco Rubio over some of America's most critical foreign policy commitments. From delaying weapons for Taiwan to tensions with NATO allies and thousands of Afghan partners stranded overseas, Coons demanded to know where the administration stands.
I know from our service here together that you agree that China is the greatest national security threat that we face. And one of the key reasons is their repeated threats to take control of Taiwan by force if necessary. And Taiwan, as we both know, is not just some faraway island. It produces 90% of the semiconductor chips critical to everything from F-35s to iPhones. And its geography makes it indispensable, both to global commerce and military power. Do you agree with that?
Taiwan? Yeah, it's not just strategically important in terms of where it's located. It also is the message that it sends to the world if something were to happen to it.
Agreed. That's why for decades, really with leadership from the Senate in a bipartisan way, we've provided arms to deter the PRC's potential military aggression. In fact, you introduced the Taiwan Peace Through Strength Act of 2023. In January, Congress pre-approved a $14 billion arms package for Taiwan. It's been 6 months. We haven't received a notification. Have you advised President Trump to proceed with this?
Yeah, it's under, but I don't know if you were here a moment ago when I discussed, we just did $11 billion in December, which was, I think, the largest sale in history. Certainly, I think it was more than the cumulative amount under the Biden administration. And I recall during 6 years of the Obama administration, there was zero gone to Taiwan. So some way you would argue that we're trying to make up ground.
So why hold off on it now?
Well, so the other 14 is being reviewed. It's under review. It hasn't been, I think it's been noticed, but it hasn't been reviewed. I mean, it hasn't been approved yet. So it's under review under the White House.
Mr. Secretary, my concern is that President Trump has said publicly that arms sales to Taipei are a great negotiating chip with China. And my concern at a time when the PRC has been far more aggressive than they were in previous years, centerline crossing, circumnavigation of Australia, aiding Iran and Russia in their war goals and aims, frankly, literally helping Iranians target U.S. service members. I respect the importance of our having an open negotiation and relationship with the PRC, but in the meetings you were in Beijing, did the president offer to condition arms sales to Taiwan in order to placate Xi Jinping?
Well, look, I'm not going to discuss what was the president's words in a meeting and not. Suffice it to say that, you know, that specific question you just asked, that's not the context in which the president has raised this in the past. When the president says it's a great negotiating thing, what he's really saying is it's because China, as you can imagine, always mentions this. Like, this is a top priority for them. They are constantly talking about Taiwan arms sales. But that in no way is what is holding up our decision-making or the White House's decision-making. It is something the president will have to decide on the timing of when and how that is executed on. It's been approved by Congress. It's been noticed. The money's available. And as I said, we are just coming off the heels of a very large sale in December of last year. So there are a variety of reasons why these things don't happen immediately.
Well, since this hearing, Taiwan has continued to face growing military pressure from Beijing. The most important development is that the Trump administration went ahead with a major new U.S. arms package for Taiwan in December 2025, worth roughly $11 billion. That package included HIMARS, Javelin missiles, howitzers, and other weapons. So the debate in this exchange is not simply about whether Taiwan needs weapons. It is about how quickly Washington is willing to provide them as China's military pressure continues.
I'll just assert, Mr. Secretary, that there is more reason than ever for the administration with congressional support to continue providing robust military capacity to Taiwan, given that the PRC is more and more regionally aggressive. You also introduced and passed legislation in 23 prohibiting any president from unilaterally withdrawing from NATO. I assume this was because you recognize that our alliances are a key advantage against Russia, against China, against other adversaries. Do you still consider Article 5 an unconditional commitment?
Yeah, so let me address that holistically, if it's okay, because I think we have time to do it. First of all, you're right. I have, throughout my entire career in the Senate, and through much of my time now in this administration, been a supporter of NATO. I see its utility. The key, and I'm just being honest with you when we talk about this, one of the key arguments that I would always use on behalf of NATO is the fact that it allows us basing rights that we could use in a contingency operation in a time of conflict, in a time of need, that we just have had. So when you have countries in this alliance, because understand, at the end of the day, we are providing basically the defense backbone of an entire continent of rich countries. These are not poor countries. These are rich countries. And the utility of NATO for us is that it provides these basing rights. Now we are living in a world in which some of these countries, I point to Spain as an example, openly brag about how they've denied us the use of these bases. And so if the core rationale for us being in NATO, if what we get out of NATO is the ability to use bases, and then we have members of that alliance that are basically denying the use of those bases in a contingency,
well,
it calls them to question the entire thing.
Forgive me, I have one more question I want to make sure we get to. Is it not true that some of the challenges in our NATO relations have only come after President Trump threatened to seize territory from a trusted and reliable and contributing partner?
Fair. Yeah, I don't think that's fair.
I think he publicly said both.
I know, but I don't
use tariffs to coerce Denmark into giving up Greenland.
Yeah, but just to tell you, look, if you go back and study the history of it, NATO tensions and debates within U.S. or whether we should be in NATO. In the 1970s, it was the reverse. It was the administration trying to stay in NATO and Congress trying to get us out.
Yes.
I happened to see a speech, they were playing it after he passed away on C-SPAN, Jesse Jackson at the 1988 Democratic Convention calling for the United States to get out of NATO.
I
so
was
these
there.
Debates over NATO, you were at that?
As was Joe Biden.
Oh.
Joe Biden didn't support that position then, and I don't support that position now.
But my point is that these debates about NATO have been ongoing for a long time.
The NATO debate has moved into another major phase since this hearing. NATO allies held their 2026 summit in Turkey in July, with the alliance continuing to push members to increase defense spending and strengthen their military capabilities. The dispute raised here remains important because Washington is demanding greater contributions from European allies while European governments continue to depend heavily on the United States for the alliance's military backbone.
There's about 1,100 vetted Afghan allies being held at Camp As-Saliyah in Qatar. And that includes 400 children and 150 family members of currently serving active duty U.S. service members. They've been stranded there for a year and a half. And there is talk of sending them either back to Afghanistan, into the waiting arms of the Taliban, or into war-torn and now Ebola-infected countries like the DRC. And these are people who they or their immediate family members served alongside U.S. soldiers at great risk. Can you commit to working with me and others in this body to support the relocation of these vetted individuals to the United States, especially those who are family members of currently serving U.S. soldiers?
Yeah, I can't. First of all, as you know, we're under an executive order now after the National Guard attack here, and so that happened last year. So we can't admit any Afghans at this point into the country. That said, you just pointed to them being sent back to Afghanistan. Our goal, we've worked on this, and we'll work with you on it,
Please.
Is we have talked to multiple countries. Now, I don't know of any single country that's going to take 1,000 people, but we've talked to multiple countries about taking several hundred of these people and allowing them to move to a safe location. As you know, we are operating under not just those restrictions, but broader restrictions about immigration into the United States after 25 million people entered this country illegally over a 4-year period leading up to this administration.
The president just
but I'll work with you to find the right places for them to go. We want that to happen.
The president just raised the refugee cap exclusively to allow Afrikaners into our country. I would welcome a chance to work with you to find safe third countries for these Afghans. And I frankly think we ought to be revisiting our refugee policy. because the refugees who've come into our country in the past are the most vetted and often the highest contributing. As you know, my childhood church hosted a South Vietnamese family, and seeing the 5 of them become great Americans, entrepreneurs, contributors. It is refugees from oppression overseas, whether from Cuba or Venezuela, Vietnam, or Afghanistan, who have long contributed to the United States.
The hearing took place on June 2, 2026, as Secretary of State Marco Rubio faced questions from Senator Chris Coons about Taiwan, NATO, China, and the fate of Afghan allies who had supported U.S. forces. Since then, the Taiwan issue has remained unresolved. Rubio said the proposed $14 billion Taiwan arms package was still under review, not canceled, and emphasized that U.S. policy toward Taiwan had not changed. President Trump subsequently said the package was still being considered. The uncertainty has continued to draw congressional attention. In July, the House passed legislation containing $500 million in foreign military financing for Taiwan, reinforcing congressional support for Taiwan's defense even as the larger $14 billion package remained unapproved. Taiwan's government has continued to emphasize the need for U.S. weapons to strengthen its ability to deter Chinese military action. Coons' concern about Taiwan, therefore, went beyond a single weapons transaction. His argument was that delaying major arms transfers while China continues increasing military pressure around Taiwan could weaken deterrence. Rubio's position was that the administration was not abandoning Taiwan, and that the timing of the additional package remained a presidential decision. The administration has continued to say that Washington's objective is to preserve the existing status quo across the Taiwan Strait. The hearing also exposed a broader disagreement over America's alliances. Rubio defended NATO's strategic value but argued that Washington must question the alliance when members restrict U.S. access to military bases. His comments came amid continuing negotiations involving the United States, Denmark, and Greenland over U.S. military access and Arctic defense cooperation. Coons also raised the situation of Afghan allies stranded at Camp As-Saliyah in Qatar, including people who had worked alongside U.S. forces and relatives of American service members. Rubio said the administration could not commit to admitting them to the United States under the immigration restrictions then in effect, but said the State Department was working with other countries to find safe third-country destinations. Senator Chris Coons questioning centered on a fundamental issue. Is the United States still treating Taiwan as a strategic priority, or is Taiwan becoming a bargaining chip in negotiations with China? Coons began by establishing why Taiwan matters. He pointed to the island's strategic position and its importance to the global semiconductor supply chain. More importantly, he connected Taiwan's security directly to the broader U.S. competition with China. His concern became sharper when he raised the $14 billion weapons package. Congress had already supported the package, yet the administration had not moved forward with final approval. Coons wanted to know whether Rubio had personally advised President Trump to proceed. Rubio's answer was revealing but carefully worded. He emphasized the massive $11 billion Taiwan arms sale completed in December 2025, arguing that it demonstrated the administration was already providing substantial military support to Taiwan. But he acknowledged that the additional $14 billion package remained under review. Coons then confronted the administration's description of arms sales as a negotiating tool with Beijing. That is where the disagreement becomes significant. From Coons' perspective, weapons for Taiwan are primarily about deterrence. If China believes Washington might delay or condition those weapons for diplomatic reasons, Beijing could conclude that American commitment to Taiwan is weakening. Rubio rejected that interpretation. He said China's objections to Taiwan arms sales are well known, but insisted that Beijing was not determining the administration's decision. The subsequent developments show why Coons pressed the issue so aggressively. Trump continued to describe the $14 billion package as something under consideration, while Rubio maintained that U.S. policy toward Taiwan had not changed. The NATO portion of the exchange revealed a similar tension. Coons viewed America's alliances as one of Washington's greatest strategic advantages against China and Russia. Rubio agreed that NATO has significant value, but he focused heavily on what the United States receives in return, particularly access to European military bases. His example of Spain was designed to make a broader point. If allied countries refuse to provide access during a military contingency, Washington has to reconsider how effective the alliance actually is. Coons, however, was concerned that Trump's own confrontational approach toward traditional allies could be contributing to those tensions. That disagreement reflects two different visions of American foreign policy. Coons emphasized alliances as strategic commitments. Rubio emphasized alliances as relationships that must also serve concrete American interests. Neither side denied the importance of NATO. The dispute was over what America's obligations should look like and how much pressure Washington should put on allies. The final section concerning Afghan allies added another dimension. Coons highlighted people who had risked their lives assisting American troops and pointed specifically to family members of currently serving U.S. military personnel. Rubio did not promise admission to the United States. Instead, he said the administration was looking for countries willing to accept groups of Afghan allies elsewhere. That answer demonstrates the broader immigration policy constraints surrounding the issue, but it also leaves the humanitarian concern Coons raised unresolved. The strongest part of Coons' questioning was that he connected all three issues, Taiwan, NATO, and Afghan allies, to the credibility of American commitments. If the United States asks Taiwan to rely on American deterrence, allies in Europe to rely on NATO, and foreign partners to risk their lives alongside American troops, then Washington's decisions can affect whether other countries believe American promises are durable. That is ultimately what Coons was testing. Rubio's response was that American commitments remain, but they must operate within a broader strategy that considers U.S. interests, military capacity, negotiations, and immigration policy. The Taiwan arms issue is especially important because it remains unresolved. Congress continues to support additional defense assistance, while the administration has not yet given final approval to the $14 billion package. So the central question raised by this hearing remains straightforward. Can the United States strengthen deterrence against China while simultaneously using Taiwan policy as part of a broader negotiation with Beijing? That is the strategic tension at the heart of Coons' confrontation with Rubio.